Hey y'all, welcome back to my series covering the 40k timeline. This is part 3, so if you're interested, check out parts 1 and 2. But with all that said, let's get into this. During the Unification Wars on Terra, the Emperor began laying the groundwork for his Great Crusade, to reunite humanity and cast out the darkness of superstition all across the galaxy. He made a treaty with Mars through which he secured the manufacturing resources of the Red Planet, and he made 20 legions of Space Marines to wage wars where he needed them. But the Emperor's a busy guy, so he doesn't have time to lead all these soldiers by himself. This is where a mullet came into play. During the Dark Age of technology, the Emperor found a warp portal upon the planet and entered it, where it's theorized that he made a deal with the Chaos Gods and exited greatly empowered. A large part of his purpose in doing this was to gain the power to create what he called Primarchs. He and a perpetual woman named Erda, with some warp shenanigans, created 20 sons, although the Emperor did not view them as sons, but rather as weapons. These Primarchs would each have a legion of Space Marines who would take on aspects of their respective Primarch and share many traits with them. The Primarchs would be responsible for leading their Marines, and eventually the Emperor would hand the war efforts off to them entirely. But unfortunately, the Chaos Gods would not like this plan very much. Whether it was because the Emperor reneged on their deal or they knew it would lead to their destruction is unclear, but the Chaos Gods would throw a massive wrench into the works here. The exact method they used is, again, unclear, but what is known is that all 20 Primarchs were cast into the warp and scattered among the stars as infants. The Emperor's Great Crusade now served two purposes. One being his original vision of bringing all of humanity under the fold of his newly formed Imperium, and two, to recover his lost tools. Setting out from Earth several years later, the Emperor would recover his first found son on the planet Chthonia, Horus Lupercal. Horus grew up among clans of thieves on Chthonia, but the Emperor took him under his wing and taught him much. The two fought alongside each other for many years, all the while saving each other's lives on multiple occasions. Roughly 20 years after Horus's discovery, another Primarch was found upon the ice world of Fenris, Leman Russ. This process continued, with each Primarch being found over many years, but throughout it all, it was clear that Horus was the Emperor's favorite son. Despite the Emperor's aloofness, the Primarchs referred to him as father, and knowing their hunger for glory and that it would increase their effectiveness, the Emperor allowed it. The whole time the Primarchs are being discovered, planets were falling under the Imperium's banner, and soon every lost son was found and dozens of planets conquered. The Space Marine legions now had their fathers, and their effectiveness quadrupled, with even more planets being brought to heel. For roughly 200 years, the Great Crusade, spearheaded by the Emperor and his lost sons, rolled across the galaxy, reuniting many lost humans and destroying many mutated or warp-corrupted beings. Many worlds had developed faiths in their long separation from their brothers, but these were always squashed, with the Emperor only allowing the truth of science and knowledge to be held among his worlds. The Emperor had foreseen the threat of chaos and knew that belief fed the dark gods, and so he sought to remove it altogether, replacing it with the imperial truth. The Crusade continued like this until the late 30th millennium on the planet Olinor. Here, the Emperor and Horus turned back a massive orc assault, with both almost dying in the process. The Emperor claimed it was the greatest imperial victory to date, and found that there was no better time to announce his departure from the Great Crusade. He would be returning to Terra to work on something which few knew of, but would prove to be humanity's only hope for the future. But in his absence, who would lead the Crusade? This is when a decision that would shape the very future of the galaxy was made. The Emperor would name Horus as War Master, second only to the Emperor himself, and leave the responsibility of leadership upon his favorite son. The Emperor would return to Terra to continue what was termed his great work. He knew that use of the warp was extremely dangerous and would one day doom humanity, so he discovered the Eldar's Webway and saw a path forward that would allow humanity to exist free of the warp's influence. On Terra, he and his custodians would work on clearing out the Webway of demons and some Eldar forces, and the Emperor would find a way to seal off the Webway from the warp and place seals on portals. Horus wasn't ecstatic about his father's decision, and neither were many of his brothers, who felt as though they had been overlooked. But they would begrudgingly accept their father's decision and return to doing what they did best. Over the next 5 years, the Primarchs and their legions would bring many more worlds under compliance, but little did they know the Chaos Gods were scheming to topple the newly named War Master. There would soon be a bit of trouble among the Primarchs, as Magnus the Red and his Thousand Sons were avid users of psychic powers, and some Primarchs, namely Leman Russ and Mortarion, did not like that. A meeting was called, which is either known as the Council of Nicaea or the Trial of Magnus, where Magnus would be told to leave the warp alone and that outside of travel, all warp use among the legions was forbidden. The Emperor's 17th son, Lorgar Aurelian, was designed to be like the Emperor's anti-prophet, proclaiming the good of super-atheism to all that would hear it. But due to the scattering and Lorgar's raising on the planet Colchis, he would become essentially a normal prophet. Once discovered, Lorgar would worship the Emperor as a god, and throughout the Great Crusade, the worlds his legion brought unto compliance were taught that the Emperor was a god, and also worshipped him as one. The Emperor, of course, didn't jive with this idea, and one day he would raise the word-bearer city of Monarchia, and would rebuke Lorgar for his methods. Lorgar would, understandably, not take this very well, and would seek new gods that deserved his worship. And man, did he find them. He began a pilgrimage into the Eye of Terror, where he would be introduced to the Chaos Gods, who he would begin worshipping. They would instruct Lorgar on what he should do, and he would set about laying the groundwork to turn his brothers to worship of the Dark Gods. The Word-Bearers would establish warrior lodges among the legions that were secretly chaos cults. A word-bearer that everybody loves, named Erebus, would take a blade of Nurgle from an alien race that Horus was attempting to negotiate with, which resulted in the destruction of said aliens. Horus, who already had a real weight on his shoulders, would be very bothered by this, as all seemed to be going well prior. Erebus would plant the blade with the governor upon the moon of Davin, and would declare that it was now home to traitors. Horus and his legion would go there to settle things, and upon arrival, Horus would meet the governor, who had become a bloated home of disease and pestilence. The two would fight, and Horus would be stabbed with the blade, and despite his near demigod level biology, there are few things that can withstand the plague god's plagues, and he would fall ill. Despite Apothecary's best efforts, Horus would fall into a coma, and out of desperation, his sons would take him to a warrior lodge to see if they could heal their father. Meanwhile, on the planet Prospero, Magnus the Red foresaw what was going on, and despite the Emperor's decree, he would project his astral form to communicate with Horus and try to warn him. Within the lodge, Horus underwent a ritual where Erebus in disguise showed him the future of the Imperium. He deceived Horus into believing that the Emperor intended on discarding the Primarchs once they had outlived their usefulness, and Magnus would show up within Horus's mind and try to talk some sense into him. But Horus, who was already under great stress from leading the Great Crusade, believed Erebus's lies and cast Magnus out. Now walking the path of damnation, Horus would awaken healed and would begin planning to overthrow his father. Over the next few years, Horus would twist those around him to his goals, including turning 8 of his brothers traitor and convincing the Mechanicum's Fabricator General to hold the newest armor and vehicles for the traitor legions, through promises of unrestricted access to forbidden technology. Horus was able to convince roughly half of the Imperium's forces to join him, and he now had all the manpower he needed, so all that was left to do was to reveal himself. His first greatest move would be upon the planet of Isfahan III. Horus knew that not all of his legion would turn against the Emperor, and that they would have to be gotten rid of. The loyalist sons of Horus, Death Guard, Emperor's Children, and World Eaters would be deployed on Isfahan III under the guise of smashing some rebellions. This was of course a trap, and the War Master was preparing to drop virus bombs on the planet's surface, killing all the Marines on it. But Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children would manage to get word out to his brothers, and most were able to survive the initial drops. Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard was even able to escape and begin making his way to Terra to warn the Emperor. The Loyalists on Isfahan III made a valiant effort, but the War Master's bombardments were eventually too powerful, and almost all were killed. Meanwhile, Magnus, who knew what was coming, once again broke his father's orders and sent his astral form into the warp to find a way to Terra. Seeking to warn his father as quickly as possible, a warp entity would tell Magnus of a faster route, and once he found it, Magnus saw that it was blocked off, and not even he could break through it. The entity would assist Magnus in breaking through the seal, and he would find himself on Terra. The Emperor was minding his business when Magnus's fiery form burst into the throne room, urgently trying to warn him of something. The Emperor, for the most part, wouldn't listen, and would cast his son back to Prospero, angry at him for what he'd done. As Magnus returned to his body, he realized the enormity of his folly. The seal he had broken was the one the Emperor had placed on the Imperial Webway, and now was open to the warp, flooding with demons and giving them a direct path onto Terra. The Emperor would be forced to sit upon the Golden Throne 24/7 in order to keep the waves of warp beings from pouring forth and destroying the throne world. With the betrayal at Isfahan III and Magnus's folly within the Webway, things were not looking good for the Imperium. But don't worry, they get much worse very soon. But that's for next time. Thanks for watching, y'all. Hope you enjoyed the video, and be sure to like and subscribe if you did, and let me know in the comments what topics or characters you'd like to see me cover next. Be sure to check out my community tab where I'm currently running weekly Primarch battle brackets. And with all that said, I'll see y'all later.